So my first question before we dive into the various policy angles for my guest, Lora Ries, Senior Research Fellow for Homeland Security at Heritage, is do we even have an idea of the number in its present day?
Good morning, David. Thanks for having me on. And no, we do not have an accurate number of who is currently here in the country illegally. And that's intentionally so by groups on the left. They like to blur the line between legal and illegal immigration. And if they don't consider immigration to be illegal, then they certainly don't want numbers expressing the size of that. The number range that we continue to see in print is anywhere from a low of 11 million to upwards of 22 million or more.
See, and this is part of the language distraction and deflection that goes on. Our policymakers, Lori, they're not being honest with us about this, are they?
No, I mean, I worked on Capitol Hill many years ago, and on the House Immigration Subcommittee, and we tried many times to get numbers around the size of the illegal population, and the obstruction of that is the ways that they do it are countless. Whether it's, well, we don't collect the data, or it's too difficult to kind of crunch the numbers, or many, many reasons. And it's extremely frustrating, and it continues. And I think just one part of the issue, if you look at how immigration is managed in the federal government, it is spread over many departments: Homeland Security, Justice Department, HHS, State Department, etc. And that aggravates this inability to get a good grasp over the size of the problem.
Is this a case, Lora, and you and I have had these conversations where we keep expanding the various tentacles to this, but is this a case of making a problem too big to fix? Therefore, the fix that's available is to grant this comprehensive / amnesty, and it's supposed to magically go away.
Well, it wouldn't magically go away, because illegal immigration begets illegal immigration. And if you continue to hold out green cards, or even the promise of green cards, then your next caravan forms, and it doesn't stop. It is a tremendous problem, and the Trump administration made many changes in the right direction to crack down on fraud, but the border is not completely secure. He built 450 miles of new wall. You never heard about the northern border or visa overstays. So there are so many different facets to this problem. It is very, very large. And the talk by Biden's campaign and now the transition just breaks open the problem even more so.
And by the way, I meant too big to fix as in not in a good way, but the way some see it. So the only answer is that, and it doesn't fix the problem. Is there any growing or serious recognition of the resource issue that this presents for the nation when it comes to illegal immigration? And I like you, look at this in its complexity, whether it's illegal aliens from Asia, from Africa, from south of the border, or visa overstays, whatever it is. Eventually, that becomes both a resource and a cost. And a cost, of course, affects resources and those that have to pay for the existence of those resources: programs, food programs, education, medical care, and so more. Where are our lawmakers who would look at this honestly, and is it just ideology driving this?
Well, there are various studies out there trying to measure the true cost, and some are more comprehensive than others. And it is a tremendous cost. And unfortunately, I think Joe Biden is and his administration is going to increase that cost considerably. Instead of addressing the problem, just for example, for Central Americans coming up here outside of our borders and kind of pushing the borders out, his posture is to let them in and then process them. Last week, Kamala Harris gave an interview at Univision and talked about increasing the number of immigration judges to deal with the backlog of cases that are in court. But if you're just going to let all these people in only to process them, not only are you not going to get a handle on the court backlog, you're just going to keep adding to it. And it's kind of a fool's errand and a financial bottomless pit.
Isn't that just a deflection by her, however? Because let's look at the reality that when you do for their court appearance, they disappear. We're balkanizing the country with illegal aliens, and the percentage that return is, well, minimal.
Yeah, the Department of Homeland Security just put out a very good report on December 31, which I would commend to your audience. It's called the DHS FY20 Enforcement Lifecycle Report. And in it, they looked at encounters from 2014 to 2019. And they found that, for example, 98% of aliens who were continuously detained were removed. But if you're allowing numbers in that exceed the number of detention beds, then yes, we're going to return to a catch and release posture. And many of those never appear in court. So, for example, DHS found that of the 3.5 million Southwest border encounters during those 5 years, half were repatriated, and about half have no confirmed departure.
So let's look at some other aspects of this that we really need to pay attention to, and where we are now on, a future with what I would call unfettered illegal immigration. And I'm looking at a labor force component here. When you broadly examine much of the illegal population in the United States, less education, if any education at all, they compete for those Americans, those who are here in America, at a lower level for jobs, whether it's day laborers to whatever. And I'm not saying that some aren't very well educated, because we've seen that, but that's not the bigger problem. An oversupply of labor will affect those Americans that the Democrats tell us they care about. Doesn't mean, it's MLK Day, so we could default to the obvious. I began talking about the black community, but even as that begins to see a reduction in employment, there are areas in America where unemployment based on economic levels is extremely high, and now they will have to compete for those jobs.
That's right. I mean, we just saw the unemployment claims jump here in the U.S., and it is also the driving factor of these caravans coming up from Central America. I mean, their economies have also been racked by COVID, and so it's drawing them up here. And so you are greatly increasing the demand for jobs. And one example I tend to point to is you didn't hear a lot about worksite enforcement during the Trump administration. But one example occurred in Mississippi in 2019. It was several chicken processing plants that were in black and impoverished communities. And those processing plants had hired illegal immigrants. And, the Americans in those communities needed those jobs. They wanted those jobs. And so it is absolutely false to say, these are jobs Americans won't do or aren't willing to do. When there is cheaper labor in the mix, unfortunately, too many employers are going to go that route, and at the expense of Americans getting back to work.
Let's draw resources down to a really granular level. Call it Main Street, or maybe the side street off Main Street, or the alley here, Lora. And frankly, not much of a joking matter at all. for those that require more resources, as in whether it's food support, education, healthcare, etc., that falls right back on the backs of the taxpayers in this country at every level. So the resources are diminished, but the cost for those increased resource needs are being paid by the very people being out or displaced by the oversupply of labor, and the companies and the individuals who pay our higher tax numbers. So, I mean, this is a cycle of economic stupidity. I have no other way to put it.
Yeah, you're right on the resources, whether it's public schools, oversized classes, too few teachers, the need for English as a second language, hospitals, I mean, you name it, all the way down to overcrowded roads, use of parks. I mean, there's many types of resources that get drawn on. And you're right, at the taxpayer expense. And given the way our tax system is set up, it's on the backs of a limited population or percentage of the taxpayers.
All right, now you wrote a great piece, and I want to go to that. And I know I appreciate the fact that you give us the time here to talk through these issues. A brand new op-ed with former DHS Oversight Counsel Mike Howell. And the focus on the Senate and the coming migration crisis. The thrust of the piece, you cover a number of things there, but the real thrust and the new information you want Americans to pay attention to.
Yeah, the point is that we are going into a single-party leadership. And with that, the Democrats are going to be able to implement their immigration agenda, and it is a radical immigration agenda. We are talking open borders. And while Joe Biden has said, we're not going to open the southwest border on day one, we're talking 6 months, no one should take comfort in that delay, because his administration will be under extreme pressure from the radical left to open that border and open it now. And with Congress, fortunately, they have not been able to pass a major immigration bill since 1996 because they're so split. And any immigration bill quickly becomes a 1,000-page bill, and it dies of its own weight. And so this Congress is extremely split. So I'm not anticipating them suddenly able to pass an immigration bill, unless, of course, they unfilibuster. That is a possibility. But otherwise, I think we're going to be looking at Joe Biden doing a lot of executive actions similar to President Obama and President Trump.
Right, so no solutions, no legislative action of any means, and a continuing problem. Lori, you and I, as I repeatedly say at the end of our interviews, will have a lot more discussions about this. But I really appreciate the work that you do at Heritage and the information you bring here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.